Dr. Kristen Hoerl is Associate Professor of Communication Studies at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and a prolific and award-winning researcher who studies how popular film and television shape public understanding of social activism, particularly movements that respond to white supremacy, patriarchy, and neoliberalism. Her first book, The Bad 60s: Hollywood Memories of the Counterculture, Anti-War, and Black Power Movements, won the Best Book Award from the American Studies Division of the National Communication Association. She co edited Rhetorical Histories of Social Movements in the United States and is a past editor of the journal Women's Studies in Communication. Her most recent book, the subject of our discussion today, is The Impossible Woman: Television, Feminism, and the Future. I am delighted to welcome you to the Indoor Enthusiast interview, Dr. Hurl.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. And I love the name of the podcast as a fellow indoor enthusiast.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm here in Colorado where there are a lot of outdoor enthusiasts. And so I just want to proudly fly my flag as an indoor enthusiast. All right, well, let's jump in to your book. Dr. Hurl, what is The Impossible Woman? And who are some of TV's impossible women that you examine in your book?
Oh, good. The Impossible Woman, it's a character type I found across a variety of television programs. An extraordinary, talented, resilient woman who finds it impossible to reach her goals because misogynist men or patriarchal struggles constantly get in her way. And so I noticed this caricature construction across a variety of genres of television. So they included comedies with Leslie Knope and in Parks and Recreation and The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. I found it in period dramas from The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel to Beth Harmon in The Queen's Gambit and NBC miniseries to fantasy and thriller television, including Daenerys Targaryen in Game of Thrones and AMC series, Queen of the South, the character Teresa Mendoza. And so I noted that these characters they're aspirational to some extent. Some fans have stated that these characters represent the kind of people that they'd like to be themselves, people who are confident, competent, yet cheerful and attractive, meeting conventional beauty standards. But these characters are also really complicated. They don't always behave like heroes. Some of them, like Daenerys Targaryen, are power craven. And yet, in one way or another, each of the characters I studied in the book express some feminist commitments. They want to make the world a better place. They want to make sure that women and girls aren't victims of exploitation, sexual abuse, or workplace discrimination. And they learn that they might be able to get ahead in their jobs, earn money, get elected to political office, or become queen of the realm. But they can't do it unless they abandon their goals of supporting and protecting vulnerable to others. In some cases, they learn that exploiting others who are vulnerable is the key to their own career achievement. And at other times, when they stand up to corporations, sexual abusers, and tyrants, they're punished for it, often really brutally. And so, in short, I thought that this Impossible Woman character teaches its viewers that even the most impossibly capable women find that sometimes even their modest goals are impossible to achieve because patriarchal structures and the mediocre men around them are determined to see them fail.
Mhm. So, the notion of the impossible woman is connected to something you call sexist realism. What is sexist realism, and how is it related to the various forms of feminism or false feminism that circulate in popular culture?
I came up with the concept of sexist realism as something that expresses a kind of ideological idea that women should fight against patriarchy, but it would be naive of them to think that they will succeed. Um, since impossible women face setbacks after setbacks is sort of the narrative structure of so much of feminist or so much of television oriented towards women between like 2005 and 2016, since we see the stories that women try to succeed, but they fail, that I think that these TV series depict striving as a virtue for itself, as sort of the best outcome one could hope for when achieving a more just and equitable world seems nearly impossible. And so this is a little different from the idea of post-feminism,
Mhm.
a concept that has circulated since really the 1980s among feminist scholars and media critics. For post-feminism was the idea that we got a lot of messages in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, and still to some extent today, that our society doesn't even need feminism anymore, either
Mhm.
because it already succeeded, so we're done with that, or from another perspective, the idea that feminism failed women, making them unhappy or making men feminine and weak. I think that what's happening currently in the Impossible Woman cycle of television, is that sexist realism acknowledges that women need feminism, but
Mhm.
it can't imagine how they might use it or what feminist reality might even look like.
Mhm.
It can acknowledge the problems that feminists addressed as real recurring issues, but can't seem to envision what women, or anyone for that matter, who cares about gender justice, um, can't even imagine what people could possibly do about these issues to
Mhm.
enact any kind of meaningful transformative change for the lives of women, girls, um, and other groups who are exploited. Um,
N And that's a real I mean, that's really damaging in our popular culture, since popular culture is one of the spaces in which we're supposed to be able to imagine change and imagine difference. So it's really kind of insidious. I mean, I know in our day-to-day lives, it may feel sometimes like there's how do we solve these problems? But if then we go to the spaces where we can imagine change and it's also telling us there's no point, why are you trying to overcome the sexism that's in the system? That's really insidious.
what kind of feeds into, I think, I've seen some popular pieces talking about, and some academic work talking about a growing sense of nihilism
Yeah.
in public culture, a sense that people don't really have much agency of their own.
Mhm.
So that might explain like rising rates of depression and political apathy.
Mainstream television has tended to represent the concerns and issues facing upper middle class women. And some of the properties that you already mentioned and that you address in your book are very well to do women, even queens, like a Daenerys Targaryen. Um, but is this the case for all Impossible Women on TV, or kind of to what extent does sexist realism impact the lives of women who are not white or middle class?
Yeah. So to your point, I just looked at some of the recent data coming out of UCLA in
Hmm.
their Hollywood Diversity Report. The latest data that they compiled was in 2024, where they noted that 80% of lead actors in the top streaming TV series are white, 34% of them are female, and only 8% of the most watched comedies and dramas had a woman of color as the lead. I think my analysis bears out these statistics, that these television series are full of. I found so many different depictions of impossible women. Most of these characters were white, but not all of them were white. There are a couple other series that did something a little different. For my book, I decided to focus on Teresa Mendoza of Queen of the South. That was a fascinating series. The main character is a Mexican woman who's forced to working for a drug cartel, goes on to become a drug queenpin. So she's a bit of an anti-hero. She's impossibly resilient. She has exceptional business skills, but she dreams of running a drug cartel without violence, and she refuses to work with sex traffickers. So, right, she dreams of a world in which she can have it all. Narcotics trafficking, it doesn't depend on cruelty or murder to manage conflict and competition. But most of the men that she works with refuse to work on her terms. And she realizes to survive, she's got to abandon her business.
I will hunt her down.
My life is on the line. Are you with me? If you want to succeed in this business, you will have to choose between survival and your heart. You can't have it all.
Right? And part of what I thought was interesting about the series is that seasons 4 and 5 um, put the focus on the criminal justice system in the US. Her base of operation is in the United States, in the US version of the series. And it's the CIA, local sheriff's offices, and uh, local judges who are the greatest perpetrators of violence and abuse. So I thought what was interesting about the show is that it doesn't place all the blame on politics and economics in the global South. Instead, it pokes fingers at U.S. governing institutions for being invested in white supremacy and harboring deep misogynist attitudes.
Mhm.
So, but another way I think in which sexist realism impacts women of color um, is indirectly in stories featuring some of these white impossible women, because to some extent across each of the case studies I looked at, each of the TV series I analyzed, impossible women often sometimes take advantage of people of color or queer people to get ahead. Right? And so part of the complication of impossible women is that these white impossible women fail to recognize the ways in which their privilege of whiteness enables them to be complicit
Mhm.
with the very kind of practices that um, engage in exploitive behavior. So, for
Right.
an example, like in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel,
Mhm.
Midge gets over a moment of stage fright in the series by nearly outing another performer, a Black
Mhm.
gay man, Shy Baldwin, who's not out publicly because he fears it would destroy his career. The series is set in 1960s America.
Mhm.
And so this character, Shy Baldwin, cancels her from his tour, and then Midge complains that Baldwin was just another man who destroyed her life. She fails to recognize that she nearly destroyed his. I think this happens, I think, around season 3 and season 4. And what I find
Mhm.
so interesting about it is also that, like, in the reception to it, viewers seemed really torn on whether Midge was a hero or an anti-hero, or just now suddenly the show's villain. And so I think that the response to Midge Maisel also kind of points to a crisis facing feminist organizing in the US. That feminist organizing has a reputation for being a movement by and for white women to the exclusion of the needs and interests of people of color. And I think that sexist realist narratives also complicate the image of white women as champions for justice by depicting women as both perpetrators and victims of exploitation and abuse.
So I'm thinking in your book, when I think about Queen of the South and The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, a lot of those shows have casts that are sort of racially segregated. You know, there may be one or two characters of color on The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Queen of the South is comprised of more people of color. Um, but is the fact that we don't have these robust interracial casts represented in these shows also part of this problem?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a contrast to series that are known for having a really strong ensemble. These are not ensemble-based shows, right? These are shows that tend to focus singularly on like one woman's struggle. And so part of what I wrestle with in the book or think about in the book is the ways in which these shows are responding to what some scholars have termed neoliberal feminism. And if you're curious about learning more, Catherine Rottenberg has an awesome book about this. She analyzes laser. I love her work, especially analyzing Sheryl Sandberg's book Lean In, which, if you were, you know, coming around to feminist work, what, when was it, like 10, 20 years ago, this book is all over like airport bookstores.
Yeah, and
Anyhow,
famously, Sheryl Sandberg herself had to disavow it when she realized that even for somebody as wealthy as her, leaning in wasn't practical when you don't have a partner and you have children in your life.
right? So yeah, so neoliberal feminism itself sort of references the ways in which pop culture has characterized feminism in terms of women's strive for personal achievement and self-advancement, particularly in the workplace. So Sandberg was kind of epitomized neoliberal feminism accomplishment, right, on the face of it when she wrote that book. Right? And under neoliberalism, individuals are responsible for managing problems they face, such as sexual harassment and workplace discrimination. It sounds like, yeah, Sandberg herself realized that, right? that sexist realism made a little more sense than the neoliberal feminist dream of personal enrichment through hard work and determination.
Mhm.
So critics pointed out that it's kind of a hollowed out version of feminism, and it ignores histories of feminist activism in which women collectively fought for political rights, economic justice, and an end to multiple forms of exclusion and exploitation. To tell that story, you would need to have a diverse, multiracial cast. Right?
Mhm.
The Impossible Woman instead focuses on a woman's effort to embody neoliberal dispositions and virtues.
Mhm.
Right? But the shows are interesting because they're so ambivalent, right, about this effort. And these women, right? They want to be political leaders, queens of the chessboard, queens of a southern drug cartel, but they also have commitments that challenge neoliberalism. Most of these characters want to protect vulnerable people from exploitation, at least as part of their mission. And they, like Sheryl Sandberg, learned that neoliberal feminism is a fantasy that can't be realized. Uh, no one can become powerful solely through determination, even if we have oodles of both.
Yes. So, as I was reading your book, I was thinking of some of the figures we have in our pop culture and specifically our influencer culture right now. In the past couple of years, we've heard quite a bit about the emergence of the trad wife, particularly as a social media influencer. Is the trad wife an impossible woman? Or is the trad wife the opposite of an impossible woman?
So I have both.
Okay.
Okay. So on the one hand, right, the trad wife content is often counterposed against the idea of the girl boss. I've
Okay.
seen some folks will talk about like, the problem of the girl boss, right? Which I take as a kind of everyday phrase for neoliberal feminism.
Hmm.
And I think both the Impossible Women and the Trad Wife are responses to neoliberal feminism and what it fails to do for women,
Hmm.
right? Um, on the other hand, Trad Wife influencers are people who make their careers as influencers by touting their decision to leave the paid workforce or embrace their roles as wives of mothers. So, so again, these are ambivalent positions, right? They're career oriented, but through the practice of aiming or espousing a lack of interest in career ambition. Right?
Hmm.
And so, on the one hand, many trad wife influencers justify their decision to focus on marriage and the family and home life by pointing to neoliberal feminist goals of personal workplace self advancement as sources of unhappiness and unfulfillment. And I think those complaints, I mean, they're not entirely justified. I think they're completely justified, right?
Hmm.
Well-paying employment is increasingly hard to find. Wages haven't kept up with
Hmm.
inflation. Workplace demands have become increasingly ruling. Right? But these influencers also are not talking about the ways in which full-time work and non-waged labor is also demanding and difficult. And it ignores how women in single wage earning households can also be vulnerable to abuse and exploitation, particularly if they're dependent on the wage earner's income.
Hmm.
Right. Um, but again, right, tradwife influencers earn an income from their work on social media platforms as they sell their tradwife lifestyle. So there's irony in tradwife content. Um, this tension has recently been spoofed in the recent
Yeah.
fictional satiric novel Yesteryear
Hmm.
by Caro Claire Burke. It's I think, a good housekeeping recommend.
Hmm.
And it's been optioned as a movie to star Anne Hathaway, who's I think also producing and
Hmm.
possibly directing on that. But I want to check on that. I know
Hmm.
she's been involved in the production process.
My name was Natalie Heller Mills, and I was perfect at being alive.
Sure.
can't wait to see you at yesteryear.
There's a lot of negative and positive media commentary depending on your outlook about trad wife content. But I think that the tension surrounding or the controversy surrounding yesteryear itself and the kind of tensions and contradictions surrounding trad wife content also points to the failures of neoliberal feminism.
Hmm.
Uh, and I'd say while the trad wife conflates neoliberal feminism with feminism itself and blames feminism as the source of women's problems, I think The Impossible Woman implicitly indicts neoliberalism for failing women. I think that's where an important distinction can be made.
Well, maybe we can flip a little bit. What if we go from trad wives to OnlyFans? To do the two ends of the spectrum. A new series that takes on the question of feminism and neoliberalism is Apple TV's Margo's Got Money Troubles. It's a family drama about a college student who gets pregnant as a result of a relationship with her professor and drops out of school and gets an OnlyFans account to pay the bills. In addition to featuring a big name cast with Elle Fanning, Michelle Pfeiffer, Nicole Kidman, and Nick Offerman, the series has a 96% fresh rating on Rotten Tomatoes and 8 Emmy nominations. So it's got some critical acclaim, some popular appeal. As I was thinking about that show in relationship to your book, I wanted to ask: is Margo an impossible woman?
So, Margo has some of the dispositions of an impossible woman. She's very talented, excellent script writer, right? Screenwriter,
Hmm.
right? She's created an imaginative world for her her fan base. And she wants to take care of people in her life. But I don't think she's an impossible woman. I mean, for one thing, she's not impossibly capable.
Hmm.
She makes a lot of mistakes, right? But also OnlyFans work is not something she aspires to as a way of like demonstrating her own capacity or an individual achievement. She just needs a quick way to like pay her mounting bills while working from home with a newborn without
Hmm.
any other kind of supports or with limited supports.
Hmm.
Right. I think that this also might mark some a bit of a shift in television's treatment of women. Right. If in some ways I think the Impossible Women marked a transition point away from a sort of cultural enthusiasm for neoliberalism.
Hmm.
Right. And maybe also another way of thinking about it is I think we're seeing sort of waning faith in the American dream. Our capacity for the good life is increasingly dwindling
Hmm.
because of a variety of different economic, political, and cultural conditions.
Hmm.
So I think now what we're seeing are different kinds of stories that are trying to fill in the gap, right, of those American dream stories. The trad wife is one effort to fill in the gap by offering a different narrative to women. I think that a story like Margo's Got Money Troubles is a different kind of story, right?
Hmm.
Um, right? The series marks the decline of the girl boss. It does point to cynicism toward the American dream myth. It features the sense that we don't live in a meritocracy. The deck is stacked against most workers, and that working women's lives are increasingly driven by the desires of white, wealthy men.
Hmm.
Right? But while the series is quite dark, I think the conclusion is more optimistic than the Impossible Women stories I've examined in my book. So I'm going to just talk um, very generally about it because I still think it's a fun watch. I don't think I'm
Right.
spoiling
We don't want to
pleasure.
spoil the very last scene,
I
right?
don't think I'm spoiling the pleasure of watching it. But I think one thing I noted is that um, the conclusion deserves both some praise and blame,
Hmm.
I think. And I never want to suggest that any particular text is a perfect representation, right, of feminism or any other commitment. But the show has some feminist implications because it presents the legal justice system as one that has the capacity to protect the rights of mothers.
Hmm.
But on the other hand, it divorces legal rights from economic justice as things that are right, sort of that we would fight for separately from one another without acknowledging that these two things are deeply entwined. So,
Right, because in the span of the series, Margo is both trying to support her newborn baby, but also there is a custody battle, and so the legal system is implicated in that way, and so it's this sort of push and pull between you're putting your baby first and doing what you need to do to financially be secure, but the fact that what you are asked to do or what you have to do to make that security happen might jeopardize custody rights in this case. So that's kind of the battle that the series is wrestling with.
Right. And in the series, while it presents that battle as something that is potentially winnable,
Hmm.
it does not suggest that anything else should or needs to be in place for Margot to make sure that she can care for herself and her young child,
Hmm.
right, beyond her own gumption and hard work.
Right.
Okay? And in that sense, it kind of celebrates OnlyFans as a means of women's empowerment, which is kind of harkens back to a kind of post-feminist narrative. So in that sense, it's a pretty contradictory text.
Right. Yeah. One tenet of post feminism was that it was okay for women to use their sexual allure as a source of power, which was kind of a response against what was perceived to be the second wave feminists, never use sexuality shouldn't be a source of power. So we had that sort of battle in the 90s and early 2000s when we were talking about post feminism. So yeah, now we've got the sort of recycling of that with OnlyFans as a source of empowerment. One thing that the series does really interestingly as well is the character played by Nick Offerman, Margot's dad. He was a professional wrestler and had this very sort of outrageous stage persona, as pro wrestlers do. Uh,
Watch Jinx, the mad wrestler, face his toughest challenge yet. The fearsome birds of flight. Will he dominate the competition or be left in the dust? Any questions? I didn't think so.
And the series really asks us, how different is something like OnlyFans from something like a career in professional wrestling, both of which can have negative implications down the line later in life. Are they the healthiest lifestyles that people can be cultivating? But also, whereas men are lauded for these sort of outsized, kind of ridiculous public personae. They become celebrities. It's a path to financial security. And they're not typically shamed in the ways that a woman who would make a career on OnlyFans is shamed by. So Margo is wrestling with that question as well, which is which not a lot of television series are willing to sort of ask those questions in a way that, like, the series is also funny. It's entertaining. There's a lot of interesting work there, and two very robust roles for Nicole Kidman and Michelle Pfeiffer. So there's representation in terms of age on this series as well, which uh, makes it an interesting text, given what you're talking about.
Yeah. Huh. Um, I particularly like the role that well, I'm interested in, as I'm thinking about it, the role that Margot's roommate plays in the series. So I was
Mhm.
thinking Margot couldn't manage without her roommate. And I'm sorry that I don't, we should look this up, the name of the actress
Mhm.
playing her. She's Asian American, and she's, I think, the only character of color in the series, right? And so it plays
It looks like Sadia Graham.
she was great in the last season of Sex Education.
Mhm.
So I was excited to see her in this role.
You're sure he's okay?
The doctor said he's completely fine. No compromise to the spinal fusion or anything.
He is. And he's okay to walk, right?
Yeah, they actually recommended walking.
Basically, he just seized up. Probably more from moving boxes than wrestling. Just keep an eye on him.
Yeah, the reason I called, I haven't got an eye on him.
What?
Well, he went for a walk about 20 minutes ago, but he seemed okay.
Susie.
Look, it's difficult to keep an eye on two different people. Yes, it is. One who can walk and one who can't.
Girls, come on. We don't got all day.
I'm coming.
I'm sorry. I'll call you back.
But I was thinking about also the frustrating way in which, on the one hand, she's such a great character, but on the other hand, she does play a kind of supporting role where she does the daycare for Margo, helps her manage everything. But that's her, right? That's the only function that she plays for the most part in the series. She also helps boost up Nick Offerman's agency in the series. So I was watching, I'm like, how does she get by? She's in school. How is she doing this? What sacrifices is she making to help, buttress this working class family struggling, right? To help Margo as she's facing a lawsuit by her child's father, whose parents are very wealthy. So the class conflict, I think, is really important. Right? To talk about the class conflict in narrative form, I think, is one of the valuable attributes of the series. But then the way it tries to integrate a more multiracial cast by including Graham into it, it's also frustrating.
In the conclusion to your book, you talk a little bit about Kamala Harris's presidential bid and how your book helps us understand what happened in 2024, what those of us who want a more feminist future should be working towards now. Can you talk just a little bit about what you shared in your conclusion about Kamala Harris's presidential run and how it relates to the Impossible Woman?
Happy to. So, okay, first a few caveats, right? That I don't want people to mistake sort of how I was thinking about Harris at the end of my book, because I wouldn't characterize Harris's agenda as a deeply feminist one, right? Nor would I applaud her presidential run or any woman's presidential run solely because someone's a woman or a woman of color. Right. And I think that logic itself is kind of grounded in a neoliberal framework that I think The Impossible Woman is grappling with. But I did note that, as soon as Harris's campaign was announced, the campaign supporting Trump's election embraced racist and sexist insults to delegitimize her campaign. According to many Democratic pundits at the time, Harris ran a flawless campaign in a truncated timeline. I'm sure that's debatable, but a lot of people noted, given what she had, that it was an exemplary campaign. And yet more voters were swayed to support a male candidate well known for sexist behaviors and commentary. And this reminded me of results following the 2016 Democratic primary for the U.S. presidency, when Elizabeth Warren's poll numbers failed to keep pace with her male opponents and consistently lagged behind. And one Ipsos poll found that voters questioned her electability, as only 33% of those polled believed their neighbor would be comfortable with a woman in the Oval Office. So a good number of people said, well, I would support, I think 70% said they would consider a woman for office, but couldn't imagine their neighbor supporting a woman for office. I think some pollsters thought that asking people what they thought their neighbors were voting for was a better way to predict an election outcome at the time. And so this illustrates, I think, the ways in which sexist realism buttresses patriarchy, not because people hate women per se, either electorate, the viewing public, but because they presume that sexism is an unshakable dimension of politics and society. And so this poses quite a crisis for democracy, and I think that crisis has only been sharpened in the last year. I don't know. I read The Guardian. I read The Guardian op-eds yesterday, and Moira Donegan yesterday commented that the Democratic Party is far more interested in gaining back male voters that they lost in 2024 than they are in addressing the rising tide of open, violent misogyny embodied in figures such as Andrew Tate, who was arrested again earlier this week or the last week. And so, thinking about the Democratic Party's silence regarding Tate, Donegal concludes that it shows, quote, how broadly male supremacist thinking has seeped into the conventional wisdom of political strategists. And so here I think we see the ways in which even the most basic feminist claims that women should be protected from sexual violence is considered to be a losing political issue in the US.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, and it's really I mean, part of this, I think, is how reliant political strategists are on polls and how unreliable polling is. I mean, since 2016, polls regarding political campaign outcomes have been notoriously unreliable. And I think part of that is because um, if you're polling on will this hypothetical candidate and fill in the blank, black candidate, gay candidate, woman candidate, are American people willing to support a qualified X candidate from their party? The responses are almost always in the 90th percentiles of people saying yes. Party is the biggest determiner, but after party, it's like, okay, yes, a lot of Americans see themselves as willing to support this diversity of candidates. But what happens when we turn it from a general hypothetical to a specific narrative is then you give people all of these specific opportunities to say yes, but not them. Yes, but not her. Yes, but not him. And so it allows us to do the mental gymnastics that we need to reject certain candidates as unviable while still thinking of ourselves as good progressive people. It's like, well, it's not my sexism or my racism or my homophobia. It's just this
I
one.
just didn't like the sound of her voice.
That's right. Exactly. All right. Every woman is the wrong woman. So if you're working to build a healthier democracy, how does critically engaging popular culture help us to do that?
So, I think it's important to note that like popular culture is political,
Mhm.
right? In a way that I think it's easy to dismiss. Right? That media entertainment provide cultural resources that shape how people think about their lives and possibilities.
Mhm.
Right? The TV shapes our understanding of reality even when we're not primed to be persuaded. Maybe even when that television content is fantastic. Right? So science fiction, horror, fantasy, they all are produced out of a particular social moment
Mhm.
that's real, material to us. Right? Um, and they reflect our lives and conditions, and then tell us stories. In some ways, could be read as kind of civics lessons for
Mhm.
how to respond to the issues that resonate on the small screen or in film as well on the big screen.
Mhm. Mhm.
Media studies scholar Doug Kellner has written that fictional media content transcodes the political, economic, and social issues viewers face when they're not watching television.
Mhm.
Right? I find that observation really important. TV is political even when it doesn't announce itself as such. So, to understand the attitudes and problems facing viewers, we might look to television narratives to get a sense of what attitudes and beliefs are circulating and being cultivated by television narratives.
Mhm.
And if we watch enough stories that tell us feminism is impossible, we may come to believe that sexism is an inevitability. And that might shape our attitudes, right? Whether we're voting or engaging in activism, even in ways um, that we might not be like consciously aware of.
Mhm. Mhm.
But if we watch stories that illustrate people have worked together to struggle for rights and justice, then we can glean lessons from it and how we might achieve our own goals in the future.
Absolutely.
But I also want to say it's important to recognize TV narratives are not simply the result of writers sitting in a room trying to tell good stories that viewers might want to consume.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think that that's often an assumption that people make
Mhm.
about the process.
Mhm.
Right? The problem is not the individual writers are sexist or ignorant.
Yes.
Right? The TV narratives are the product of a variety of different forces, including the interests of media owners, producers, and sponsors.
Mhm.
So Paramount's decision to cancel The Late Show with Stephen Colbert after Sundance Media purchased Paramount, a blatant and I think fairly obvious example of political influence on television content. All media, in some way, including the circulation of The Impossible Woman, is a culmination of various competing interests in the television industry's story-making process. And so we also need to critically engage with what's happening behind the scenes in media industries. And that we need to recognize that media consolidation is a threat to diverse storytelling in popular culture. So if we want a healthier democracy, we also need to deconsolidate the industry. And so in the news right now is discussion about the proposed Paramount Warner Brothers merger. I think it's important for us to recognize that it's not just a problem for people who work in the industry or a problem just for consumers. It's a problem for democracy because the decline of media business translates to a decline in content that reflects a diversity of experiences and perspectives of communities in the US and around the world. So if we want a democracy, we need democratic media by critically engaging both what stories are told about women and how those stories come to be made. We're better equipped to fight for democracy.
100%. All right, last question. It's a question that I like to ask all of our guests. Can you point to something in popular culture, be it television, music, comedy, digital culture, comics, anything, one popular culture artifact that maybe helps us, gives us a building block for building a better, healthier democracy?
I get that question often. And I think my previous commentary points to the challenge of answering that
Yes,
question.
it does.
And likewise, I think it's difficult because I never want to be caught suggesting that there are pure and impure texts, right? And I just felt like I think especially there are a whole range of documentaries that depict organizing for rights and justice. Um, I just read a story about how the documentary about Amazon workers, just called Union, about their unionizing efforts, could not get a distribution deal, likely because Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos would not look favorably on it, but it is available to rent online. And so there is content circulating, but viewers have to work a little harder to access some of that. But my own interests and my own viewing pleasures are often tied to scripted fictional narratives. So thinking about this question, I want to think about what are the texts that I consume when I just want to be entertained. And I think there are a couple that I think are exemplary or better than others. So I really like the series Sex Education because it has a more um, multiculturally diverse cast of young people. The series is not overtly about politics in any sense of it, right? It's about um, how adolescents in a high school in the UK come to understand their sexuality, but they're all vulnerable with one another. They make mistakes one another, and the women in the series, even though they don't always get along and don't always share a lot of common, come to find solidarity with one another, particularly on protecting each other from exploitation and abuse in a way that um, is about them learning to build solidarity and coalitions with one another rather than expecting any individual just to figure it out on our own. I also really love the series Wednesday, particularly because that character also isn't a big striver, but demands justice for her community, um, and avoids other people's efforts to make her an icon for the school. And even if she's not much of a joiner, but she learns, right? She's got to build community with other people, right? To support a school where everyone is safe and healthy. Um, and so I like those as alternatives to both the Impossible Woman and the Trad Wife.
Yeah, I mean, two things I love about the examples that you brought are, as you know, the emphasis on community, and they really, both of those shows really demonstrate that community building is fraught and we have to struggle and we make mistakes. And I think that's a great metaphor for democracy as well, that it is not perfectly progressive. There are stops, there are starts, there are complexities, there are hurts, there has to be, repair being done. And you see that happening on both of those series. This has been a great conversation. Dr. Hurl, thank you so much for your book. I would just hope that everybody gets a chance to read it, not only because it's a great book, it'll teach you a lot of things about feminism, about different kinds of feminism, about popular culture, about media studies, but also because it gives us the tools for, as we are enjoying different kinds of series, whether they are prestige series or comedies or dramas or, not prestige series. Your book tackles them all, gives us tools that we can use to really sensitize ourselves to how popular culture can help us create a more successful democracy and or can inhibit the formation of a healthy democracy. Popular culture is definitely important to this project of trying to build a healthy democracy. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.